What's up, guys? Welcome to my ranking of the Wizarding World movies. That is all 8 Harry Potter films and now the 3 Fantastic Beasts films that we have. And this is actually the first time that I have ever discussed this franchise on this channel. I am extremely new to these movies. I grew up with Harry Potter to an extent. I read the first book in 4th grade. I watched the first film whenever it hit theaters. It felt like it was going to be the biggest thing to ever happen to movies at the time. And I've actually seen The Sorcerer's Stone a number of times with the intention of finally watching the rest of these movies, but I just never quite got there for whatever reason. I'm not really a big fantasy guy. And so the past month, I spent rewatching The Sorcerer's Stone and then finally watching for the first time the rest of the Harry Potter films. I watched all of the Fantastic Beasts films on the day that Secrets of Dumbledore actually dropped in theaters, and now I'm here to talk about all 11 movies. So please, keep in mind, I know there's a lot of passionate Harry Potter fans out there. Try to understand my unique perspective, where I come to as somebody that never read the books with the exception of the first one when I was a kid, that has never had this huge dying love for this franchise, that doesn't really have any nostalgia for any of these movies except for the first one. So very weird, unique perspective that I'm bringing to this, and admittedly that's going to lead to probably a ranking that's not going to line up with your ranking. So just tell me down below what your ranking is, why your ranking is that way, if it is because of the way they adapted the books, or if you're just a fan of the movies and why you like those the best. And let's talk about these Harry Potter and Fantastic Beasts films down below, instead of berating each other for not having the correct ranking. Coming in at number 11, the only film on this list that I can pretty much say that I disliked and had a bad experience with, and that is Fantastic Beasts and the Crimes of Grindelwald. Like I said, I watched all of the Fantastic Beasts for the first time in one day, and this middle chapter really was a slog to get through. It felt like it didn't know whether or not it wanted to follow up the whimsical, magical side of things with these creatures of the Fantastic Beasts storyline, or if it wanted to get into this dark, epic, evil versus good wizard storyline between Dumbledore and Grindelwald. And so it kind of just shoved it all into one. And you have a central story that really isn't all that exciting for that middle chapter that is supposed to be setting up these huge threats and setting up the good side and the bad side. It's a pretty meandering plot that has a whole bunch of side plots and a whole bunch of detours. I'm not particularly a big fan of Johnny Depp whenever he does these weird characters, which is the vast majority of the characters that he plays, so he's actually my least favorite version of the character of Grindelwald. And while I like the character of Newt Scamander, while I certainly like Jude Law's take on Dumbledore, I don't feel like either one of those characters gets enough focus, where I would prefer to have Dumbledore as the protagonist. It felt like he didn't get enough focus for that, and Newt Scamander just kind of felt like a character that shouldn't be the lead of this movie if we're going to start talking about Grindelwald and all of this epic evil versus good stuff. After watching all 11 of these movies, this is the only one on this list that I really have zero desire to ever go back and rewatch again. A bit of a step up, but my number 10 is actually the newest film, Fantastic Beasts and the Secrets of Dumbledore. Now, I feel like this and the original Fantastic Beasts are very close for me, but I just don't really care for these Fantastic Beasts films. Like I said at the beginning, not really a big fantasy guy. It's not really my genre. And so when I get into movies like this, if it has the magic of most, if not all, of the Harry Potter films, I can get into it and I can actually enjoy the fantasy genre. But these Fantastic Beasts films, 3 movies in, really have failed to suck me into these characters, suck me into this story, and in this prequel to the Harry Potter franchise. And even with this one being a lot more focused of a story and deciding to focus 100% on the good versus evil and the Dumbledore team versus the Grindelwald team, it just feels redundant of the storyline that we've spent 8 films building with the Voldemort versus the Team Dumbledore thing. So there's not really anything about Grindelwald or his plan or his people that his posse that is with him that really makes him stand out as somebody who is as good as Voldemort, as interesting as Voldemort, or even somebody that's just different than Voldemort. And the easiest way that they could do this is by really focusing on Dumbledore, giving us a lot of character development with who this guy was before the Harry Potter franchise, and really exploring that complicated dynamic between him and Grindelwald, especially when they're going to canonically put into this movie that they were gay lovers, and that is the the whole pretext to this blood oath that they have and why they can't physically go against each other, and they just mention it in passing to the point where China just deleted that one scene at the beginning of this film, and that entire subplot is basically gone from the film. If you're going to explore that, explore it. They easily could have made the whole conflict between these two characters so much more deep and interesting and complicated by exploring that. They just chose not to. So it's another vanilla, passable, decent Fantastic Beasts film that I won't say that I would dislike rewatching, but certainly after walking out of the theaters, didn't exactly have the desire to rewatch it anytime soon. Coming in at number 9 is Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Now, I debated on putting this movie a couple of spots higher because I think that the job that this movie sought out to do is probably executed a little bit better than a couple films that I have above it. But at the end of the day, I just don't care for this storyline. I don't care for these characters and this whole approach of let's just go and find all these magical beasts. I like the character of Newt Scamander. I think that Eddie Redmayne brings a lot of joy to this character, and he's certainly fun to watch, but it's just not particularly a movie or a storyline that speaks to me, or a movie that I really get all that invested in. So even the lesser Harry Potter films above, I actually am more invested in those characters and more invested in where that story is going than I am in anything that happens in this film. This kind of feels like something that's in this world, in the wizarding world, that's more appealing to kids. Let's watch this goofy character go around and try to capture all of these magical beasts. And the movie does decent enough with that concept, while setting up all these things with Grindelwald and this little, removing of the mask at the end between Colin Farrell and Johnny Depp, but it's just a film that doesn't really go anywhere that I want to follow it. Coming in at number 8 for me is easily the weakest of the Harry Potter films, and that's actually Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. And I think what really goes against this movie for me is that as somebody that grew up with the only movie I have nostalgia for, the first one, this one felt like it was repeating a lot of the same story beats of that first film and of that first story, to the point where it almost felt redundant. And it didn't help that this is the longest Harry Potter film off of one of the shortest books, believe it or not. So this is back when they still felt like they had to pack every single story element from the books into the movie. We have to make room for everything. Eventually they realized they can't do that as the books got bigger, and they started to say, okay, whatever happens to Harry, that has to be in the book. Everything else is fair game. But this is one of those films where every side plot, every side character, every little detour tries to make its way into the movie, and it makes the film feel extra padded to me, to the point where I was still having a decent enough time with it, but I kept checking my watch going, my God, how much more do we have? Eventually, please, find the Chamber of Secrets so we can move on to Azkaban. Now, you still have a lot of that fun, a lot of that coming-of-age joy that you get out of the earlier Harry Potter films, where they are much more kid-based and a lot more family-friendly and not quite as dark. And even though it does repeat some of the beats of the first film, it does have a lot of the charm and a lot of the approach of the first film, being that it's also directed by Chris Columbus. But of the two, I just much prefer the storyline and the introduction of the world of Sorcerer's Stone versus all of the storyline regarding Tom Riddle and this diary and the Chamber of Secrets that we get in the second film. But Dobby was a good character. Number 7 is going to be Deathly Hallows Part 1. Now, unfortunately, this movie falls victim to the same thing that every other Part 1 movie falls victim to, and that it's an entirely setup and exposition filled movie. All of the payoff, all the things that you're building to, all the things that you're waiting to see is inevitably in the second film. So I think Avengers Infinity War and Endgame are the only 1-2 punch that have successfully pulled this off. Every other time they have split a book or a storyline in two and decided to have a part 1 and a part 2, whether it be Hunger Games, whether it be Twilight, even though I've never seen them, I've heard everybody say that it's true. And then this one as well, is that you have all of the exposition and setup and all of the slower moments in the first film, and then it cuts off at a cliffhanger, and then you have all of the payoff in the second film. And that's absolutely true here with Deathly Hallows Part 1. You put the whole story of both films together, it's essentially about our main trio of characters going off on this adventure to find all these Horcruxes so that they can destroy them and eventually take away the immortality of Voldemort, and then it all converges on this huge epic battle between the Death Eaters and Hogwarts, to where Hogwarts eventually prevails over Voldemort. Well, all of the awesome stuff stuff that I just described in that little plot synopsis is pretty much in the second film. This first film is just about them going off into the woods, spending a lot of time in a tent, having some personality clashes with each other because of the amount of time that they are in seclusion, because of all of the death and the darkness surrounding the situation that they are in, and because of this little locket that they're wearing that turns them into assholes. And they find one Horcrux and destroy one Horcrux by the end of this film. There's 7 in total, 2 of which we've already seen destroyed, so you have 5 Horcruxes, and 4 of them are destroyed in the second film to this movie's 1. So it's a good setup to the final film. I think that there was a way that they could have just done a 3.5 hour film and just pushed both of these together, but money talks. 2 movies make more money than 1. I just feel like this movie gets shortchanged like every other movie that gets split into 2 from a book. It's all exposition. I want the payoff. Number 6 is Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Now, this is a film that I feel like there's a lot of interesting pieces to it. Unfortunately, it feels similar to Deathly Hallows in that it's setting up a lot of things that we're eventually going to see happen in Deathly Hallows. And so it kind of falls a little bit victim to the same thing that I talked about with Deathly Hallows Part 1 and all of the payoff coming later for the things that this movie is setting up. So you have everybody back in school, you've got a new potions teacher, and you have Snape, who is now your Defense of the Dark Arts teacher, the job that he's wanted since the beginning of this series. And there's this book that Harry gets a hold of in his potions class that is signed Property of the Half-Blood Prince. And so all throughout this school year, he's learning about these little spells and potions and everything, and he's finding all like a cheat sheet inside of this book that's showing him how to make these spells better, how to make them more powerful. And so he gets a hold of this luck potion. There's this whole mystery regarding who is this Half-Blood Prince, how does he know all these special potions, and eventually it leads to this mystery regarding Tom Riddle and the time that he has all of these memories and his past time at Hogwarts and what exactly was Voldemort's plan. So it's a movie that's setting up this mystery of Half-Blood Prince while explaining a lot of the backstory of Voldemort. And so very intriguing questions that are eventually revealed in the final act of the film, but everything leading up to that is kind of just typical Hogwarts stuff. There's not really any huge standout sequences or big character moments. It's just those 2 mysteries. And you get a little bit of Ron finally becoming a popular guy at school because he's the goalie at Quidditch, and you know, there's always some good character interactions with everybody in this school. But the mystery of the Half-Blood Prince, to me, it was obvious who it was, so that didn't really come to a hugely satisfying conclusion. And then the whole reveal of these Horcruxes, again, that's something that's interesting to find out, but you don't really get the payoff of that reveal until you get into the latter half of the Deathly Hallows stuff. So really the best part of this movie to me, the most intense part, is where Harry goes off with Dumbledore to find a Horcrux. You get a little adventure with those 2 in this cave, and a lot of dark shit happens, and eventually the huge climax of this movie where Dumbledore is killed by Snape. And so really this movie doesn't hit its height until like the last 15 minutes, last 20 minutes for me. The rest of it's decent. It's just not a movie that as a standalone is one that I would necessarily go back and rewatch on its own. Number 5 is one that I've pretty much gathered is going to be a bit of a controversial statement.
Well, this is gonna hurt like a mother.
Even though I'm saying all of these movies are pretty much good, there's no movie on this list aside from the Fantastic Beasts that I would say I dislike. My number 5 is going to be Prisoner of Azkaban. Now, I started doing some research after I formulated my list and was starting to prep to do this video. I started watching other people's rankings and Googling some other, some news outlets and how they've ranked it. And it seems like everybody and their mother thinks this is the best of this franchise. So, sorry, I didn't. Now, there was part of me, I will admit, was probably a little bit overhyped when I walked into this film because, again, this was a first-time watch like all but one of these films. And I remember hearing a lot of people say that this is where the series takes a huge turn, and it does stylistically. It's a lot darker, it's a lot more mature, gets away from that Chris Columbus tone, which I do enjoy, but this film kind of sets up the tone and the approach and the look of all the other films to come. And so it's a very important film in this franchise. And Alfonso Cuarón, I could say you could make the argument that he did the best job as a director and with the cinematography. It's a very good-looking movie. But the story for me felt like kind of doing the same thing that the first two films did, but do it in a little bit more of a mature tone. So again, there's a small amount of this movie that feels like we're going through the beats of the first film and the second film again. And I liked the new characters. I liked the Professor Lupin. I liked Sirius Black. I liked the whole mystery that was involved with his character. Is he coming to kill Harry? Is there some secret there? What is this mystery regarding his past with Harry Potter's parents? And I think it comes to a pretty satisfying conclusion, especially with the werewolf. I always love seeing horror creatures, whether or not they're in fantasy or not. So that was cool. And I did like the fact that there's a time travel element to this, because I'm also a sucker for time travel. So I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. But where it didn't quite blow the lid off for me, why this wasn't necessarily my favorite easily of this franchise, obviously, was, because I've already said, feels slightly redundant, but also because we enter this time travel element for the last act of the film, it feels like we see the end of the film twice. It's kind of like that Back to the Future Part 2 problem, to where it's interesting to watch these events from a different perspective and to see them watching themselves and trying to change history, but we've also seen all of the events that these characters are going through already in the previous act. So it kind of feels like we're rewinding and going over the same events again. And so it doesn't really leave me on this huge high or this huge climax like some of these films have that I have above it. Number 4 is going to be Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Now, again, I know that this is not typically a film that is high on many people's Harry Potter rankings, at least the ones that I've seen, but understand this is the only film in this entire franchise that I actually do have nostalgia for. I remember elements of reading this book in 4th grade. I remember going to the theater with my mom and seeing this opening night, and it was just this huge global event and being so excited and just, oh my God, I get to see Harry Potter like brought to life in movie form, because I just did not like reading as a kid. That story seemed cool, but I couldn't pay attention. I want to see it in the movie form. And I do have some nostalgia for also playing the PlayStation 1 game that was tailored after this movie. And so there's a lot of elements to this original story, to this introduction of this wizarding world, to all of the rules of Hogwarts and the sorting hat and the different houses of Gryffindor and Slytherin and Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw that nobody ever talks about. And the different teachers and the kids finding out these secrets of the school and going through all these little trials in the 3rd act to get to the big reveal of who the villain is. There's a lot of elements to this story that I really do hold as a movie that I enjoyed so much as a kid that I still enjoy it as an adult. If I had watched all these movies from start to finish for the first time last month, then this one might be low like Chamber of Secrets, but I do have a lot of burning nostalgia for this original story, and after watching the whole franchise, it's still one of those movies that sticks in my head more than some of the ones that I've mentioned below it. Now, the acting caliber of the kids, certainly not as good as it gets in the rest of this franchise. You still have that very innocent coming-of-age Christopher Columbus tone here that doesn't quite match with the rest of this franchise. The first two films are very much kind of their own little bottle, and they hold on to that childlike innocence and wonder, where everything else is very much dark and mature and going into a lot deeper themes and mythology of this world. But this is the one of those two that I still just really enjoy going back to and watching. Really quick before I get into the top 3 of this list, guys, I want to remind you, or tell you for the first time if you're finding my channel for the first time, that we are doing a 31 on 31 fantasy edition at the end of next month. That's May 31st. If you don't know what 31 on 31 is, me and my co-hosts on Autop Stream, we take a bunch of franchises together that add to 31, and we do a big massive ranking on the 31st of a month. We typically do horror franchises, but we have ventured into other genres of late. And so this year I wanted to do fantasy so that I can have the motivation to finally watch the Harry Potter films for the first time, as well as the Lord of the Rings franchise, the Narnia trilogy, and of course the only franchise in this entire 31 that I have experience with, Star Wars. So if you want to see how all those franchises battle it out for what movies are best and which ones are the worst, definitely subscribe and hang around until May 31st so that you can check out that epic ranking on the 31 on 31 Fantasy Edition. Number 3 is going to be Deathly Hallows Part 2. Now this is where you get the epic conclusion. You get all the payoff that all these movies have been setting up. You get the huge confrontation between Hogwarts and the Death Eaters. You get that final confrontation between Harry Potter and Voldemort. You get this big reveal regarding Snape and his true allegiances and what he's been doing throughout this entire franchise. You get a lot of really great character moments, even for smaller characters like Neville Longbottom. It's a movie that, because all of the exposition and all the setup is already out of the way with the first film, it can just hit the ground running and just go from the first frame all the way to the credits. And so that inevitably, like a lot of these part 1, part 2 setups, this is where all of the excitement, all of the big memorable sequences are. And so after watching this franchise for the first time and finally wanting to see for myself for the first time how all of this wraps up, I had a lot of anticipation for finally getting to this final film. Final. Take a shot every time I've said that word. And I was really happy with a lot of the answers that we were given. I was happy with a lot of the ways that things that wrapped up regarding this Elder Wand and the true holder of the Elder Wand, and Harry Potter kind of doing this fake out, and then finally everybody just kicking Voldemort's ass and making him look like a bitch in front of his entire little posse. So I had a really good time with this one. Really, the only negatives that I had with this film, which might be something that's fleshed out more in the book, I really don't know, was that I never really felt like any of the Malfoys got what was coming to them, the parents or Draco. I understand Draco was more torn. He was kind of emotional about being a bad guy, but he was still a fucking prick the entire franchise. And he never got a moment of redemption from me. And especially his parents. As soon as shit pops off and they realize they're gonna lose, they just leave. And then they never have anything come to them. And so you get to this epilogue, which I could have done without, and you see Harry and Ginny, a romance that never was particularly strong for me. You get Ron and Hermione, a romance that felt mismatched to me. I always felt like Harry and Hermione felt more natural together, but maybe I'm in an island with that one. And then they look over and they see Draco and they're like, Draco's happy and he's setting his kids on. And it's like, man, fuck that guy. Why should I be happy that he gets a happy ending? So I don't know. Enlighten me down below. Maybe there's more to the story that I have not seen because I haven't read the book, but the way it was presented in the movie, I was like, hold up. No. They need more punishment for their crimes. Number 2 is going to be Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Now, this is where the war against Dumbledore really starts. This is where Harry and Dumbledore are assembling their little army here, this Order of the Phoenix. Harry goes with all of the other students that want to be a part of this into the room of requirement and starts to train them for this eventual battle that they're going to have with the Death Eaters. And so I appreciated the fact that it finally felt like we're getting to that side of the storyline here. And I did like the fact that we started to get a little bit more focus on the Death Eaters as well, where you get Helena Bonham Carter's character of Bellatrix, I believe was her name, coming in, and she was pretty gnarly. She's certainly the one where you're like, I might hate you more than Voldemort. You're kind of a bitch. And then you get this epic conclusion at the end where they're trying to find this prophecy, and all the Death Eaters and the Order of the Phoenix and some of the adults and unfortunately Sirius Black all get into this huge epic magic war, and leading to not only the very tragic death of Sirius Black, which is a big moment in this franchise, but also the moment where the rest of the wizarding world finally sees that Voldemort is in fact back. And the most enjoyable part of this story to me was actually the character of, was it Dolores Umbridge? I could be fucking her name up, but she comes in, once again, the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, who is pretty much always a villain. That was kind of a bit of a funny trope by like the 5th or 6th movie. I was like, come on now, come on. There's gotta be at least one teacher that can take this class and be a good person. But she is just an absolute psycho. She takes like this dictatorship approach to the entire school of Hogwarts, eventually pushes out Dumbledore, who escapes in this Phoenix. And there was so much dark hilarity to the way that she was a villain that I really enjoyed, and the way that she eventually gets her comeuppance temporarily in the woods. So this is a film that I just feel like it was really starting to hit the gas. It was really starting to go towards all of the events that I really wanted to get to in this mythology and in this storyline. And overall, just the story of Harry finally stepping into that leader role and leading all of these students against Voldemort and against the brewing evil, I really enjoyed. But my number 1, which seems to be a really unpopular pick, and I don't understand why, is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. To me, this was the most exciting of the Harry Potter films. Maybe alongside Deathly Hallows 2, just because the nature of it being the conclusion, but you get this whole storyline with the Goblet of Fire that's going to pick out these names of Hogwarts students to go and basically participate in like this wizard Hunger Games. Harry Potter's name mysteriously comes out of this goblet, which is just throws everybody off because he was supposed to be ineligible because of his age. And then so Harry Potter and our new Batman have to go off and compete in these wizarding games. And I liked the turmoil between the characters that we've now seen 3 films be absolute best friends and, you know, thick as thieves, and now they're kind of against each other. Ron's jealous of Harry, and there's this turmoil between them. I thought that was interesting. I like the fact that there was all these different little games that they had to go compete in, or he's got to go take on a dragon. That was really cool. There's an underwater sequence where he has to save his friends, and then eventually you get into this maze game that leads to a very tragic death of Robert Pattinson's character, but also the first time that we get a physical altercation with Voldemort. And I thought that entire sequence was just awesome. I was actually shocked from this movie onward how little Voldemort was actually in these movies. Again, never read the books. So after this, I felt like he was going to be this huge presence in these movies, and he's really not until Deathly Hallows. So this was like the most significant section of Voldemort's on-screen story to me, where you get this graveyard that they end up at for some mysterious reason that Harry doesn't understand, and then he has his blood taken from him, and this little baby Voldemort gets brought up into adult Voldemort, and they just immediately just go to try to kill each other. I thought that was intense. I thought this movie just kept an excitement level all the way throughout it because of the nature of these little wizard games that they were going on. And then ending on the first time that we see a physical altercation with real life Voldemort, to me, this was just the most exciting movie all the way through. This made me just balls out excited to just continue on in this franchise. I was like, shit, I gotta watch Order of the Phoenix now because people don't tend to like this movie. So if this one's the shitty one, things gotta be great from here on out. And I really don't understand. I don't understand why a lot of people had this near the bottom of their ranking. I understand if maybe the book is not translated completely into the movie, but as a movie, as somebody without the knowledge of what's missing, I really enjoyed this one. I had very little negative to say about it. So whether it's a weird opinion, whether it's a crazy opinion, whether it's an opinion you agree with or disagree strongly with, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire was absolutely my number 1. So what do you guys think? What is your ranking of the Wizarding World? If you have only seen the Harry Potter films, feel free to just put your ranking of those down below. I know a lot of people have commented saying they haven't even bothered with Fantastic Beasts yet, but let me know your opinions down below. Please try to be respectful down below. I know that there's some controversy with whatever ranking comes out with these movies, but just try to appreciate different people's perspectives. And let's talk about our difference of perspective down below and talk about how much we enjoy this franchise. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button if you want to check out the 31 on 31 that's going to be coming out at the end of next month, where we're going to revisit the Harry Potter franchise, but we're also going to throw in Lord of the Rings, Narnia, and Star Wars. Should be an epic fantasy adventure on May 31st. So hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of that. Thank you guys for watching as always, and remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.